a sector that maybe didn't get as much credit as it maybe it deserved, and maybe suffered as a result of it, is that the feed industry were essentially always a very significant bankers to the pig industry. And they played a major role, in my opinion, at times when margins were negligible or negative.
When I started, there were, I think, pigs on something like 160,000 pig units in the country. The average size of herd was maybe 2 or 3 sows, and had to believe at this stage how much it has changed.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Pig Edge, Teagasc's pig podcast with me, Amy Quinn, where we are bringing you the latest news, information and advice to keep Irish pig farmers up to date. On this episode, we're taking a look back at the careers and experiences of 2 long-time Teagasc pig experts who have seen it all. Brendan Lynch, former head of department and chief pig scientist, and Michael Martin, former head of department and pig specialist. From their early days in the pig industry to the pivotal moments that shaped their careers, Brendan and Michael offer first-hand insights into the major changes and challenges in Irish pig production, along with their proudest achievements. Join us as we uncover their thoughts on the past, present and future of Ireland's pig industry. We'll hear from Brendan in a few minutes, but I first spoke to Michael about what first drew him into the pig industry and then kept him engaged with it down through the years.
Oh, it goes back a long way, I'm afraid. We're talking about the end of 1970. Not too many people can think back that far at this stage, I presume, in the industry. Hopefully not. But I was appointed to Melrose Agricultural College with a specific role to take over the running of a pig course, which had been initiated by the Department of Agriculture and the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, or at that time, to train managers for were then cooperative pig finishing units was basically the target, but it evolved straight away into providing managers or staff for pig units. At that stage, you didn't have anything of the scale we're talking about today. And you're talking about, at that stage, in the early 1970s, the first 2 units in the country were established, 300 sows each, 1 in Kilkenny, 1 in Cavan. And that was seen as a dramatic change in the structure of the industry and in the demands for staff and people to operate those units. So I was offered a job in Athenry, specifically to take on the management of that course, and I spent 5 very happy years doing that. And then and that was my start. I had no background in pig production. Literally, I had nothing except what I had done in UCD. Limited number of lectures, but luckily enough, from a very good lecturer, Frank Ahern, who subsequently went to Canada and became a kind of a leading world authority in pig production. But Frank was my lecturer in UCD. But I had my master's degree actually was on dairy nutrition, so it was a complete change of scene. But being in Athenry and being within about 30 or 40 miles of home and having an interest in football and things like that, I decided that was my I was happy enough to start there.
Michael, can you tell us about your role within the Teagasc Pig Development Department and how did it evolve over time?
Well, from after my stint at the end of around 5 years into teaching in Athenry, a vacancy arose in the Specialist Advisory Service, which was then in the Department of Agriculture, and I was promoted to that role in about 1975. And I was specialist with the late Pat Chute. We operated one half of the country, Pat on the east side and I on the west, until the formation of the Specialist Pig Advisory Service in ACOT, which was in 1984. So we continued on in that role there, but from 1984 onwards, we had a team of people. Total team of 8, 6 new people joined us, and that gave us a better geographical spread and took a lot less travelling and so on from North Mercy and Pat and myself. And that then evolved into Teagasc. When Teagasc was established, then we continued in that role and in that kind of format with a team of people, basically 8 people or thereabouts, covering the country.
And Michael, when you first started with the pig department, what were the biggest challenges that Irish pig farmers were facing?
Oh, there were, well, see, when I started in the advisory service, I think it was just evolving into a sort of commercial pig production from a kind of a farmyard enterprise. So you're talking about a situation where virtually all of the units were part of a farmyard enterprise. There were part-time operations. There was a dairy herder, there was cattle and sheep or dry stock, whatever on the farm as well. So pigs were a kind of subsidiary, very often subsidiary to that, and the challenges there. Well, but there would be some of them very basic issues about technology of managing it and so on. But as units grew, fairly quickly into modest sizes, very modest size of unit, you had to then bring along the skill set to operate those units. There were grant aid schemes available in those times to encourage the development of units, both smaller units but also larger units. And the challenges there were really training to train people and to advise people on the proper methods to operate those units.
And Michael, what changes in the industry did you find had the biggest impact on your career?
Yeah, but there was a lot. So long there, Amy, that there were so many from. I mean, I started off in a situation where I think when I started in Athenry, one of the challenges that was posed to me was to tether sows. It had been unheard of until then, and it was something that was introduced around the end of the 1970s or in the 1960s or early 70s. And from that then grew the whole evolved through a situation where you went from where tethering became outlawed, to become down to stalls, where stalls had to be replaced. And I finished up, I think, in my latter years there, negotiating with the Department of Agriculture for a grant aid scheme to help people to convert from their stall systems into loose housing. That was one element of it. But the biggest element, of course, and it was always tied in with very much with our colleagues in the veterinary service, veterinary practitioners, which was the evolution of various disease problems and various disease challenges and coping with those on units as units became bigger and bigger. When small units, disease issues were relatively insignificant. I think in my early days, that one of the conditions that really bugged people was bowel edema. But there were remedies for that, and then you had the introduction of zinc oxide and so on that sort of dealt with that. But then I think that has evolved again, as far as I understand, to be to no longer an acceptable solution to it. They were the sort of ongoing issues. The major challenge, I think, all along was to get people to record what was happening on the farms. And I think we put a lot of effort into getting people to record performance, monitor their performance, and from that you had the establishment of PIGSIS, which then evolved later on, I think, subsequent to my retirement there, around the time I retired, evolved into the e-profit monitor. But that was hugely important in terms of people identifying where the issues were on their units and what the challenges were.
Michael, over the years, how have you seen pig farming methods evolve, maybe in terms of welfare practices?
Oh, very substantially, yeah, very substantially. Not that as units grew larger, the challenges became bigger and bigger to cope with welfare. But by and large, you had systems that needed to be managed, but were very challenging to manage. Tethering of sows was a system that was very challenging to manage, and too often I felt they weren't managed that terribly well. I suppose feeding systems also helped, where you got better distribution of feed, say, for sows and so on. And then the issues of stocking rates and stocking density. Too often units grew in size above the size that their unit was capable of handling in terms of numbers, and particularly if the unit was doing, say, productivity was high, but was the finishing accommodation there to match that sort of productivity, so on. And they were some of the challenges that were there, and obviously did lead to welfare. Let's be honest about it, did lead to some welfare issues.
Michael, can you discuss the impact of legislation and our policy changes on pig farming during your time in Teagasc?
Yeah, the legislation. I think the pig industry suffered wasn't that tightly regulated initially in my most of my career, but as we came along towards, I think, sort of key points were the introduction of welfare legislation, but EU-driven welfare legislation, which led us to get involved in welfare workshops and updating units and so on. And linked to that then was the pig meat quality assurance scheme, which I would have been involved in as well. So they were kind of key factors or key areas in drawing it. I'm not reluctant to mention the whole area of nitrates and regulations and so on, but that was a difficult period, and I think the industry at the time maybe too often felt that it could manage that without too much bother. But in fact, as I think it's evident now, all these regulations are tightening. The environmental challenges became much greater.
Michael, the pig industry has faced many ups and downs over the decades. What do you think has been the industry's greatest challenge during your time, and how has it managed to survive and thrive?
I think the ups and downs have certainly been in relation to profitability, but that wasn't something that just happened a few years ago with the crisis in relation to feed. And I think I can go back into the 1970s to see situations where feed prices were extremely high. If I'm not mistaken, you go back into 1974 maybe, or somewhere around there, where soybean was a real issue. Price of soybeans were a real issue. And then you had all sorts of other challenges, down through the years. You had closure, the unexpected closure or sudden closure of a number of factories due to fire. I mean, you don't have, I can think of 3-4 straight away within, a sudden. I mean, there was no warning in those ones. Then there was obviously the whole rationalization of the factory and the processing sector that created big challenges for producers back, say, what was it, 1998, was there a big fire in Ballymoney? You had the closure of the big fire in Rooski. All of these were big issues for the industry, and they always created major difficulties. Those, along with the ongoing boom bust sort of cycles that occurred in the industry and continue to occur in the industry.
Michael, you touched on it a bit there, but how have you seen market volatility, like fluctuating pig prices and feed costs, affect farmers over the years?
Well, I think there was a certain resilience there, and there was a certain determination there. I mean, I would always admire producers and their ability to work with banks or with their lending institutions and so on, or maybe the sector that maybe didn't get as much credit as it deserved, and maybe suffered as a result of it, is that the feed industry were essentially always a fairly significant bankers to the pig industry. And they played a major role in I must say, at least in my opinion, at times in when margins were negligible or negative, and they contributed handsomely in my ways, and in some cases at a very high cost to themselves in terms of survival of the pig industry.
Michael, reflecting on your career, what are you most proud of in terms of your contributions to the industry?
I don't know. Maybe that I should be the person to go through that. No, I look back. I still take a glance at the e-profit monitor, national herd performance figures. I think the establishment of herd recording and a system of independent recording at farm level that gave people a clear picture of how the herd was or was not performing and where the weaknesses were, and it enabled us as an advisory service to focus in on where the key issues were, rather than just walking around and having a look and saying, everything is fine or everything is dandy. And it also allowed research to identify areas that needed to be focused in on in terms of an overall program from the advisory and research service. But I think the other area that again, I'm reluctant to talk about blowing my own trumpet, but my role in education and training would, because while I only spent 5 years attached as the teaching staff of Athenry, I continued to lecture in Athenry I think up until about 1995. What somebody said to me one time, you finished. I said I finished in the college in 1975. No, they said you didn't. You were still there in 1995, which was I lectured maybe 2 days a week there during the time students were there. So, and that would be the area I would probably, if you asked me to focus in on one area, yeah, I think I would be really proud of my contribution on the training side of it.
And Michael, just to finish up on, if you were advising young people starting their career in the pig industry today, what would be your key pieces of advice for them?
The training education area would be the one I'd focus in on, and number two, I would say, you must record and monitor your performance closely. Benchmark it against the better herds and know where you're going. But those would be the two areas I think I would focus in on.
That's great. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Amy.
And now let's hear from Brendan Lynch, the former head of department and chief pig scientist, to find out about his time and experiences in the Irish pig sector.
My first exposure to pig production was at home in Kerry, where we had a small number of pigs, as most farms had at that time. And then after that in UCD, I got involved in a project for a master's degree, which involved feeding pigs different sources of meat and bone meal. And from there, I got a job in Moore Park working with Jim O'Grady, who was one of the world experts on pig production at the time. And Jim was a fantastic mentor, and I enjoyed working with him for the next number of years, and eventually ended up spending 41 years in the pig industry.
Brendan, can you tell us about your role within the Teagasc Pig Development Department, and how did it evolve over time?
My first job when I started at Moore Park was working on feeders and feeding systems for pigs. And then that was 1968, and then in 1972 I got the chance to go to the University of Illinois to work with a guy called Stan Curtis, who was the world expert on environment and pig production. Environment in the sense of the effect of heat and cold and drafts and so on pigs, and how it affects their growth, their health, and their efficiency. And after that, coming back here, I got involved in looking at sow feed intake and lactation, especially how it was affected by house temperature and by drafts and things like that. At a later stage, got involved in meat quality issues and environmental issues, slurry management and so on. And then over the years, got new team members here in Moore Park, Kieran, Pather, Laura, Siobhan, and others after I left. And then we worked very closely with the universities, with UCD and UCC, and also the pig husbandry unit in Moore Park was merged with the Pig Advisory Service into one group, and that, I think, gave a much more successful team over the next several years.
Brendan, when you first started with Teagasc, what were the biggest challenges that Irish pig farmers were facing at the time?
When I started, there were, I think, pigs on something like 160,000 pig units in the country. The average size of herd was maybe 2 or 3 sows, and it's hard to believe at this stage how much it has changed. And productivity was poor. I think we were producing about 15 pigs per sow per year. Pigs were very fat at the time, very fat breeds. Feed quality was poor. The big development in feed quality in around the early 70s was the Moore Park diet that Tom Hanrahan introduced for the barley soybean meal diet, which became the standard in the industry. And that pulled up the average quality of feed from feed mills, and housing in pig units was also very poor. All this contributed to poor productivity and poor health in the pigs.
Brendan, what changes in the industry did you find had the biggest impact on your career?
In the early stages, disease was a big problem, partly because of the small size of units, that people didn't have the expertise to control things like E. coli in young pigs and respiratory disease in growing pigs. And also the processing industry was very fragmented, very small small pig processing units, pig meat factories, and the quality of Irish pig meat was extremely poor at the time, and it had a very bad reputation in the UK, which was our main export market. Then, as time went on, I think one big change that happened in the early 70s was that the creameries started drying skim milk, so it was no longer going back to the farms, and pigs as a kind of a side enterprise on dairy farms disappeared because the skim wasn't there to feed them. And that's after that you got specialised pig producers, especially in Cavan and also in Cork. You got people who were specialised, and they were much more focused on the newer technology in the industry and so on.
Brendan, can you tell us about some of the key advancements in technology that transformed the day-to-day operations on farms?
I think the biggest single change in the industry in the 70s, through the 70s, was the record keeping. Prior to that, most people didn't know how efficient or how inefficient their pig unit was, and the pig system developed by Pat Hewitt and Michael Martin in Teagasc became widely adopted, and it gave people a benchmark to see how their own unit was performing and how it compared with other pig units. Other issues that are developments that contributed to improvements at the time included genetics, the slaughtering of boars, which were much more efficient, and the increase in slaughter weights. And slaughtering boars was a big topic of conversation at one stage because of the concern about a boar taint in the pig meat, but that seems to have disappeared at this stage.
The pig industry has faced many ups and downs over the decades. What do you think has been the industry's greatest challenge during your time in Teagasc, and how has it managed to survive and thrive, I suppose?
The biggest problem over the years continually is the cyclic nature of profitability. If you get a few years, very good years, and then you get an increase in production across Europe, and then you get a surplus of pig meat and a drop in prices, and that has been the biggest single problem, I think. Other issues that have that are still there today and are important are labour. Paying and retaining good quality labour has been a challenge for the industry for a long time. It's working in a pig unit is not the easiest job in the world, so people need to be well paid if they're to be retained, and working conditions have to be good. And the other issue is the need for continuous reinvestment in units, and you need profitability to do that, because there's a lot of heavy wear and tear on equipment and so on pig units, and you need to be continuously reinvesting if you're to survive.
Brendan, how have you seen market volatility such as fluctuating pig prices and feed costs affect farmers over the years?
Fluctuating profitability has been a serious problem, and I think that often people were tempted to expand their units when profitability was very good, and then they had to suffer the consequences when profitability wasn't so good. But so it has always been a challenge, and it's a challenge of convincing lenders, the banking industry, that of the cyclic nature of the industry.
Brendan, how important has research been in driving change and innovation within pig farming?
I think research has been extremely important and over the years we kept in very close touch with research people in other countries, and then the research is of no use unless it's actually implemented. So for that reason we worked very closely with the Pig Advisory Service even before the units there was an integration of research and advice. And so that putting the research into practice on the farms is the very, very important part of it. Otherwise, the research is of no use.
Brendan, reflecting on your career, what are you most proud of in terms of your contribution to the industry?
My contribution to sow feeding was, I think, was quite important. The other one was the breed evaluation program that we did at one stage. That was very, very important. And Other than that, I think just keeping up with developments all over the world and trying to bring the information from other countries back to Ireland.
Brendan, if you were advising young people starting their career in the pig industry today, what would be your key pieces of advice for them?
I think to get good training for a start, and to be conscious of the business side of it as well as the pig production side of it. And if you're not making money, there's no point in keeping pigs. There's no point in having high productivity unless it's actually profitable. And that's the key thing to survival, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of The Pig Edge, and thanks to Brendan and Michael for joining me on the show. Don't forget to listen and follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from so you never miss an episode. And for more information from the Pig Development Department, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Amy Quinn. Thanks for listening.